You have real characters. I don't know why they aggregated there, but they did.
Hot water dripping down your neck one moment, freezing cold water dripping down your neck the next.
A lot of people in the heritage movement said, "You're crackers."
But it had to be done.
Terribly unsettling times.
We weren't really sure at that point when we walked out whether we would have a railway to come back to, you know.
We were forbidden by law from being here.
To celebrate our 45th anniversary, we looked at the reopening of the line and the rebuilding all the way to Alton. But there's a lot more to that story to tell. The railway would go through highs and lows and be joined by a certain few characters along the way. So, to round off the year, join us as we dive back into the story of 45 years of the Watercress Line, told by the people who were there. The newly reopened Midhants Railway was a hive of activity, with volunteers soldiering on with the task of relaying the track to Alton. With the number of new preserved railways around the country rising rapidly, the task of ensuring that they were constructed to the appropriate standard to run on fell to one man, Major Peter Olver, formerly of the Royal Engineers.
Major Olver was the inspecting officer of railways, and he had a responsibility for preserved railways, and we came under his sort of guidance, shall I put it, very early on.
But he remained in that position. I think he retired in the early 1990s, and in fact he became the safety director of the Watercress Line for a while.
He had a very good manner with us. He could get us to do things in a non-dictatorial way, I should say, and we learnt a lot from it. For instance, footbridges. He insisted on footbridges being built at all stations due to the fact that we were going to have a lot of people around.
Every station had a barrow crossing. Country stations didn't necessarily warrant footbridges, but the sheer volume of passengers warranted footbridges rather more dangerous barrow crossings.
We had to put our minds to where we could get footbridges from. This is where Chris Hunt really came on the scene, because he was very good at nosing out these things. He got to know that the footbridge at North Taunton was going to be cut down pretty quickly, because there was a road improvement going on very close to the bridge where they were going to raise the track, and they had to get rid of the bridge, so we had to move quite quickly. We had a reconnaissance visit down there, of course, with the bridge office at Exeter, and they were quite happy for us to have it, no problem at all. But we had to devise a way of getting it out. There was a car park fairly close to it where we could place a crane. Each bridge girder weighed about 7 tons. It was a solid steel girder. We had to devise a means of splitting the bridge and then lifting out one girder at a time. And because of the reach from the car park to the crane, it had to be split. It couldn't be lifted out whole. We had a party down there under a possession, burnt the rivets out and then put bolts in instead. So on the day, it would be easy to split the bridge into 2 halves with taking out all the bolts. And it was lifted out quite easily, put onto a low loader and brought up to Ropley. It was put in the car park upside down and assembled together. And it was christened as Noah's Ark, because it did look like Noah's Ark for a long time while it was painted and titivated. We got apprentices from the Royal Aircraft Establishment to build the staircases. They had to do community-related projects. And they built the 2 staircases out of wood, because the one at North Taunton was all brick, and it was a bit of a game getting it all back anyway. So we decided to make our own staircases for it, and that's what's there at the moment. So that all worked out very satisfactorily, and Major Olver was pleased with it, passed it first time,
Elsewhere around the railway, with the task of relaying in full swing, naturally it would be expected that the inspector would pay the occasional visit. However, when said inspector lived practically next door to the line, well, those visits could be a little more impromptu.
He lived locally. I think it was something like Hollybourne or something like that. So he could turn up at the railway at any time. I mean, I do remember on one occasion when we were re-railing at Alton, he just appeared behind the hedge. So I came wandering down the track and said, "Oh, Major Olver," But we weren't doing anything wrong. It was just purely the fact that, he was just keen to see how we were going, and that's the sort of bloke he was. And
you always put your best clothes on when Major Olver was coming, and he would always ride on the engine, and he always wanted the shovel. He wanted to fire, but he always walked back, and you all walked back with him at a respectful distance, and you would spot something, and Major Olver would walk straight past it, and you'd think, how did we get away with that? Until about 200 yards later, he would sidle up and say, I trust next time I visit this railway, I won't be seeing that. You couldn't, nothing got past Major Olver. And he regarded us as his local railway, because he lived between Bentley and Farnham, and he said, I will do my best to make this one of the best railways. And I think he succeeded in that.
He was, I think, pretty well immensely proud of what we'd achieved here, because we were the first railway to operate on our own light railway order from scratch, whereas at the time, previously, they had to operate under the British Railways order, and then it was transferred to you. But Major Olver was quite keen that we set high standards in terms of the operating standards, which I like to think we did. But you could never be sure that he wasn't just going to turn up.
I'll tell you what we did with Major Olver, and it's written into our light railway order that you can't electrify the line. So we knew he was coming, so we just dotted some insulator pots along the sleepers at Alton on one occasion. And he was walking on the platform, sort of, yeah, what the, is that just a little project, Major?
Elsewhere around the line, another story was taking place. It was all very well extending the line, but having proper facilities to store and maintain your rolling stock was just as crucial. Ropley was chosen to be this site, and provided a suitably blank canvas, ready to be developed.
At Ropley there was nothing where the sidings had been, and that was just an open, vast expanse of nothing, so sidings were gradually put in.
The decision was made to build what is now the locomotive shed. I think they got somebody in to put the steel up, but certainly the fitting out and the cladding was certainly done by the volunteers.
The shed was fairly short, with an old postal carriage attached to the end of it, which was used as the stores, and there was all sorts of rubbish in there. I mean, it would make a good storeman cry. It was such a mess in there, but you had to, if you were sent to find something in the stores, you probably wouldn't return for a couple of hours because of the time you spent looking for it.
In the early days, there was always this joke that the building department would have the monopoly on holes, and Ropley, over the years, became a continuous building site, because you finish the shed and then you start the wheel drop and then you start something else.
There's a pit in Number 1 Road in the shed, which when Bodmin first came out, they used to drop in there and do the middle engine over the pit at one point. But gradually, as time got on, there was always something in the shed being worked on. So it became more of a problem. So in actual fact, yeah, we used to crawl under the front bogie of Bodmin, for example, crawl underneath the front two axles and try and climb up inside to do the middle engine.
As someone who detested getting dirty, it was a little bit of a problem for me, and of course we all kept a separate pair of overalls to wear to do it. But I was usually looking for a way to get underneath an engine without sort of crawling in from the front. I particularly remember that we had a schools class come, and you could actually get through between the drivers, and because I was fairly slim, I could crawl over the brake gear and get up inside and do the oiling round without crawling in from under the front. You had to be pretty enthusiastic to lay on your back and wriggle underneath an engine. It was a bit claustrophobic as well, to say the least. Hot water dripping down your neck one moment, freezing cold water dripping down your neck the next. And it was not a very enjoyable task, but it had to be done, you know.
There was one occasion I remember where we crawled under the thing and met an adder coming the other way, who was obviously laying on the warm ash from the day before, and I don't know who was more startled, us or the adder. You know, each of us went our own separate way, you know, quite keen to see the back of each other.
Adders aside, the evolution of Ropley had begun and would continue until the present day.
The place just developed.
And that was subsequently extended to a carriage shed and a boiler shed, a wheel drop shed.
You'll go down there one week and the postal van was still at the back of the stores, and the next week the postal van was gone and footings were being put in place to extend the shed.
Where the pit road currently is, when we first started here, there was a plastic tent made out of boiler tubes with plastic sheets over that Bodmin was restored in. And the first steam engine we worked on in that shed was British India Line. They're working on that in the tent. And it was basically a dumping ground where everything arrived from Barry Scrapyard for a period of time. Everything was put in there. Was Tangmere was in there, British India Line, 31625, all manner of things, 73096 as it turned up. And ironically now that's gone from being a dumping ground and a line that was virtually never moved to the busiest piece of track in the yard, because every time there's an engine goes on and off shed, it's on and off what now is the pit.
And that now is a sizable, complex engineering facility that's been developed by the staff of the Mid-Ants Railway from absolutely nothing, because there was nothing there, just the ground. No track, no nothing.
There was nothing on the upside platform. The water crane wasn't on the platform. The engines would pull forward, had to even go past the signal to take water at one time, so they'd be flagged past the signal. And then the water column was up on a plinth in the middle of nowhere with a set of steps against it.
But I think now, you look around Ropley and you think it's all complete and it's fantastic. And from the point of view of sort of like bringing film companies here, you don't feel that you have to sort of steer them to one half of the platform because the other half is going to have a bit of scaffolding in the background. We're a nice complete railway, and just adds to the whole ambience of passenger experience. So things we take for granted now, it just looks the part, and I think the fact that we're always bothered that things look a mess is good, because there's still a will to want to try and improve it. I think we're still critical of the place not being as good as it could be, but actually if you look back about 5-10 years, you think actually, do you know what, we have moved on.
Now back to the operating story of the railway. When dealing with an ever-expanding line, with effectively new stations and passing loops being added, this would soon present new challenges for the volunteers when it came to the task of running trains both efficiently and safely. Fortunately, there was someone hiding in the ranks who could help, whether he'd liked it or not.
So when we first started, obviously it was just between Ropley and Alresford. It was quite intensive because we literally sort of had on a 2-train service going up every 10 minutes every time, sort of thing. So you actually had quite a few trains go backwards and forwards.
The engines would come work the train up to Ropley, and then quite often there was a second engine. There was 2 engines working the trains, and there'd be an engine in the loop here waiting to take the next train out. And then they would have a layover. We
had a 3-mile section. Each end was a terminus, and all of a sudden we were going to have to cross trains in the middle of this section, because a train would come down from Medstead as one arrived from Alresford. And whilst that's something we do day in, day out now, it's difficult to put in words what a huge challenge that was felt to be at the time. That was a major challenge, and that's where Paul Hawley came in.
At the time, I was station manager at Weybridge, and we had the misfortune to have 2 what BR called traffic apprentices. And one of them said, "Oh, I'm working on the Mid-Ants." "Oh, are you?" "Oh, well, I used to deal with that when I worked in the control back in the early 70s. "Oh no," he said, "it's a steam railway now." So I started coming down when I first started. My first job was at Ropley. Yeah, we had a good time.
Now, Paul was quite happily sweeping the platform at Ropley one day, and somebody said, "Oi, you're SM Farnborough, aren't you?" "Yes, but..."
And then somebody told John Feltham, who was the station master, what I did for a living. And he come up very apologetic. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I didn't know you were a station manager." I said, "Look, I'm as happy as anything here. I do what you say. I haven't got any responsibility. It's brilliant." And then, of course, it all changed.
Almost immediately, poor old Paul was transported from pushing a humble broom and quite enjoying himself incognito to a position of responsibility, because in a land of blind people, a one-eyed man is king.
And I ended up as superintendent of operation for quite a few years.
That vast experience from East British Railways days made all the difference. So once Paul Hawley was here, we were a much more slick operation simply because we had to be.
Going back to that when it started, I was doing the timetables as well, and you made sure that you drew the timetables in such a way that the trains only met at a crossing point. And there were certain operational parameters that would still apply today, that basically the up train, which is i.e. the train heading towards London, is first in the platform at Ropley and here, because he's the one that, if you stop one of those outside on the home signal, it ain't a lot of fun getting away, and if it's a bit drizzly and that, they don't want to know. So no, let them get a run into the platform, and then you time it so that the down train arrives shortly after.
On his timetables, he used to put he had a little rubber stamp with a little cat picture on it, and it's all authentic. It made the timetable authentic. That if it didn't have his rubber stamp on it, it was a prototype timetable and wasn't for publication. But I do remember a certain person in the locomotive department. He at the time didn't like that, and he sort of thought it was unprofessional, and so Paul just increased the number of times he used it, just to wind him up.
To be fair to Paul, he did a very good job. In fact, he did an excellent job in setting up the original training of traffic department members, guards, signalmen.
He taught us how to run a railway, how to do it properly, how to do it safely, and he deserves credit beyond measure for that.
It's safe to say that the new superintendent would not be the only character at the railway. At Ropley there was one man in particular who had a knack at getting people to help him out with the odd job, wittingly or otherwise. That man was Arthur Blake.
Ah, Blakey. Ropley, you had real characters. I don't know why they aggregated there, but they did, because you had the two Arthurs. You had Arthur Blake and Arthur Ledbury.
He was in charge of the station, but he had to have everything absolutely spotless, including the track work. And we all got memories of Arthur Blake down on the track, hand-picking weeds from between the sleepers through the station area because they looked untidy. And we didn't have any weed-killing trains like you do now, so that was all hard work.
He was very famous for making things out of pallets. Pallets was the staple delivery here in terms of firewood, but Arthur would select those that were still in good condition and thought, oh, I could use that. So like there's a whole, they've all been replaced now, but a lot of the fences that you see around here were originally made out of pallets. So there's this sort of a famous thing where, sort of like, quick burn it before Arthur makes something out of it.
He ran Ropley, but he ran it in his own way. And he get people to do things, and it wasn't until after they did it, how crafty old so-and-so. I didn't intend doing that, well, you've done it. And he was always going into the shed at Ropley and say, can you make this for me?
Arthur would go into the shed normally on a Sunday, wanting a little job done. And you could go into the loco shed, which was the only workshop we had at the time. And nobody was working on engines, they were all doing little jobs for Arthur, because you couldn't say no to Arthur. He was such a lovely guy that everybody's doing little jobs for Arthur.
And I remember one of the engineering managers came to me one day, he said, you're going to have to do something about it. Boy, he said, my blokes in the shed, they're doing more work for Arthur Blake than they are for the railway. I said, well, if Arthur Blake's asked them to do it, they're doing it for the railway.
And it got to the stage where there was a side entrance to the shed at the time. As Arthur went in there looking for people, they all come running out the main door to the front to go and hide, because they knew they'd get nothing else done for the railway or for the loco fleet that day, because they'd all be doing little jobs for Arthur. But the highlights got to be when he was 90, he had a party on the picnic area at Ropley. And I can't remember how a Harley Davidson arrived, whether it was one of his guests rode a Harley Davidson, but Arthur left the party on his 90th birthday as a pillion passenger on a Harley Davidson. And that's, Arthur was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
When Arthur passed away, his influence at Ropley was never lost. The Wednesday gown which he started still continues to this present day, keeping the stations looking their best. And when the old signal box at Ropley was no longer required, it was moved to the other end of the station by the footbridge, and appropriately renamed Blake's Crossing. A small tribute to a man with a big influence. Further up the line at Alton, once the relaying was completed, trains had been happily running into platform 3 at the station. The section from Medstead to Alton was initially worked under the principle of a long siding, whereby only one train could run from Medstead to Alton and had to return before the next could leave the station at Medstead and Four Marks. This lacked flexibility with regards to timetabling amongst other things, and at Alton itself there was no signal box to control the points and signals. Instead, you could find a more basic system.
Alton worked on 3 ground frames. There was a ground frame by the former brewery site, there was a ground frame outside of the present box, and there was a ground frame by the water tower on the platform, the country end of the platform.
Lee was out in the open operating the points, and about 3 of us, armed with red and green flags, waving flags towards drivers, never had a problem. The rules governing that sort of working are quite strict.
There was a need for a proper signalling system. There was a great debate of whether that was going to be semaphore or whether it was going to be mechanical or semaphores driven electrically. So it was decided that because of the geographic area that the signalling would have to cover, it would need to be a colour light system of some description. So that was what was installed.
It took 15 years to install what is in effect first generation colour light signalling. And first generation means that it's unlike the colour light signalling you'll see on the network today, which is solid state and LED lights and all the rest of it. This is very much a heritage based system.
It's been a fantastic system, and despite all the thought at the time of how expensive it was and that, it's totally transformed what we could do at Alton, the robustness of the operation, and now of course we can talk to colleagues at Woking and just exchange traffic with a phone call and turning of a few switches.
One of the advantages of the Alton signalling is its fully automatic mode, whereby once a train leaves Medstead, it can proceed to Alton, the locomotive run round and proceed back to Medstead without there being anybody in the signal box.
The engineering is the excellence at Alton, without a doubt. It's a very, very robust and versatile system, and reliable.
Over the years the railway flourished, with new installations from a footbridge formerly based at King's Cross Station to new builds, such as the waiting shelter at Ropley. A true testament of skill and creativity, to such an extent that it looks like it was always there. The railway held special events from galas, reenactment weekends, and played host to the world-famous locomotive Flying Scotsman. It was safe to say that the mood on the railway was bright, but that was about to change.
23rd of March, I think it's 2020, we just got through the Flying Scotsman event. We're on a real high from that. We opened the bridge at Alton. We just run, I think, the 6 coaches from the Bluebell for the Bullied set. Everybody's on a big high, and then, of course, COVID hits.
And the country was put into lockdown, and there was a lot of concern. How do you protect the assets here when nobody was going to be here?
And it was blind panic then, really, to try and put as many things away as we could to protect what we had. You know, Chris from the engineering side drew up a plan of basically measured everything to see what would fit where. And we basically got all the locos indoors in the shed. So there was a major shunt round on I think it was on the Monday.
So within about 48 hours, all the locos were put under cover. Barriers were put to obstruct vehicles getting in. And
we finished up around about 9 o'clock, I think it was, on Monday night, and all stood a bit bemused in the front of the shed as the roller shutter door came down with 506 just tucked up inside. We put a load of old rubbish outside the shed doors, so basically someone couldn't drive a Ford Transit through the shed doors. So we tried to basically bomb-proof it as much as we could. We had old wagons, old tenders and things against the doors. We had the tender chassis from 499, I think, in the roadway. Bags of coal, bits of fencing in the car park, a bit of an assault course. Took us 10 minutes to get out, actually. We did too good a job of it. Put a skip across in front of the gate. But a bit surreal, because you then get to that point when you lock up, and we all sort of shook hands with each other in the evening, about 9 o'clock at night, not really knowing, when we would be seeing each other again. We made a joke of sort of have a good Christmas, but in reality, we weren't really sure at that point when we walked out whether we would have a railway to come back to.
But nobody knew how it was going to pan out. We didn't know when we could reopen, what the rules were going to be, if indeed the money would run out before we could reopen. And it was really unsettling times for the volunteers and the business and the people that relied on the business for their livelihoods.
It's as fragile as that. We're not owed this railway. It's only what we put in we're able to get out. And as I say, it could have been a real turning point for us. But it was one of those moments you sort of think, well, this is a bit bizarre. We've just locked everything up, walked out. Myself and Chris Yates came in a couple of days a week and ran an engine around just to keep the place secure, make sure everything was locked up. But even that was, felt we were lucky to come in. But even then, it was unpleasant. We had to board up signal box windows. Walking around the place deserted. Weeds growing. Chucking milk out that was in fridges where people had just got up sticks and gone. It was quite bizarre. You literally, I could drive out of here. I had a letter to say, if I was stopped by the police, that I was on official business.
Terribly unsettling times. Those of us that would turn up here every weekend, we were forbidden by law from being here.
But yeah, you took it for granted. And there was a lady at 4 Marks. We noticed when we were running up and down with the 47 that she'd put a board on the end of the shed with whistle on it by Medstead's distant. And we started tooting as we went past. And gradually there were more and more signs appeared, thank you, Watercress Line and so on. And they'd often be waving at the end of the garden. And I got to speak to her a little while after the sort of lockdown finished and we got back to some sort of normality. And she said they were so special to them because it's... bizarrely, she said that was the only bit of normality that they had. They were stuck indoors, couldn't go anywhere, but the train running a couple of days a week just past and tooting at them was actually outside contact. And you think, crikey, this world must be pretty messed up if the Watercress Line is normal to somebody, because I've never known it normal in my life. But it put it into perspective, actually that meant the world to them. It was nice to make somebody's day. And she still waves now. I still toot. We just got into the habit of it, and she often runs down the end of the garden. No idea who she is, but it's a face and a wave as we go past. But it was a nice thing to be able to do. But it's a strange world. But it really, the world turned upside down, didn't it? Literally overnight.
And in the summer, we got the opportunity. The conditions were relaxed, that you could do a limited reopening. But what do you do now? Nobody's worked for 3 or 4 months, skill fade in all the safety critical skills, the operation of the locomotives, the signalling, station staff. So we put together a training weekend just to bring people up to speed and reopening with very restricted numbers. But we actually went one better than that. We did a gala, and a lot of people in the heritage movement said, "You're crackers. Who's going to run a gala in this environment?" But the bet paid off because it was a success, and we did a number of other things. But they were very, very uncertain and unsettling times.
The railway had survived the pandemic, reopening its doors and welcoming back visitors. Projects restarted, and slowly as time progressed and restrictions relaxed, the site became a hub of activity once again. Towards the end of 2020, the railway launched its groundbreaking steam illuminations train, combining digital technology with historic coaches and locomotives to create a truly spellbinding experience. There were many occasions over the years to celebrate the railway's achievements, none more so than in 2022, when on the 2nd of June, Buckingham Palace announced that the Watercress Line had been awarded the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, the equivalent of an MBE for voluntary organisations, in recognition of the extraordinary efforts that were made by so many volunteers since the railway began.
The Queen's Award for Voluntary Service is very prestigious, not just for the organisation, but principally and foremost for the people, the volunteers that make up that organisation. It's not something that's given away freely. You've got to prove that you deserve it, and the role that the volunteers play, and how you try to look after them, and how they're integral to the business. So the fact that we're wearing this badge, which we wear with pride, is because of the value the volunteers have brought to the business. Not just the present volunteers, but those that have gone before over the last almost 50 years.
It was a great thing to be part of. That was the thing for me. It was trying to get across that we weren't here just to walk dogs, or you were here because your dad wanted to be. You wanted to be accepted in your own right, and they were great people that they just took it under your wing and passed those skills on ever so quietly, ever so, don't do it like this, do it like that.
We've all had sort of challenges over the years, but we've all potentially fought for our railway. We certainly look upon it as our railway and as part of the family. There was a feeling of camaraderie and companionship.
It was a team, and if you haven't got those teams, it doesn't work. They were here because they want to be here. That's very important. They weren't here because it was a job. They were here because they wanted to be here.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the volunteers have been recognised is a fantastic achievement. Right?
It's transformed dramatically. Actually, when you break it down year on year, it doesn't. It's just progress, isn't it? You just move forward. You add a bit. But it's only when you stop and take stock and think, actually, it's transformed beyond recognition, really.
But everybody worked together. That's what it's all about.
Whenever you visit a heritage attraction, it's always easy to look at what you have now and compare it to what was there then. Very little thought is ever given to the bit in the middle, where people effectively had to rebuild the railway that you see today. And this place is no different. This video is dedicated to the hundreds, if not thousands of people who have helped make the Watercress Line what it is today. History in a heritage sector like this doesn't just happen. It's people who put in their time, effort, dedication and get a lot out of it in return. We all come down here because we love it. The last 45 years have certainly been extraordinary. The challenge now is keeping the railway going as it continuously develops and grows. The question is, will you be joining us? Thanks for watching, folks.